Alrighty, folks, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Whitfield Report. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, broadcasting here live from NGC Studios, and I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight. We are joined by Matt of Fell Ball Productions here tonight on the program, and he's a YouTube creator, and he hosts a couple of podcasts on YouTube. So I've left his channel linked in the description below. And without further ado, Matt, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, man. This is it's a pleasure to be here.
So first of all, Matt, how did you I guess how did you get started in content creation? Just tell us a little bit about your background. You have a fairly interesting background.
So my background, I was living in Los Angeles. I've been there. I was there for about 10 years. I was an actor. I spent a lot of time trying to make that career work for what that was worth. It was an uphill struggle most of the time. You know, you get a break here and there, but for the most part, it's just kind of a lot of grinding, a lot of time in acting classes and begging for people in the industry to notice you, and they rarely do. So it was a fair amount of work. And after time, I grew pretty disillusioned with it. Like from my own personal perspective of just kind of it not working out how I wanted it to work out. But another angle was really there was something there that I was seeking that I'd never got, and that was like camaraderie. I kind of always imagined that when I would pursue this thing, I would find other like-minded people. And that was going to be, you know, I would find like my tribe, as that's what they always say in LA, tribe. But then that turns out that's cultural appropriation, so you can't do that. But
Uh,
I never did, and that was really difficult. And then you combine that with the kind of tornado of aggressive identity politics that kind of covers everything in the entertainment industry. It just became like an unpleasant place to be. But I hadn't given up hope. I was still sticking around. And what ended up drawing me into YouTube was the collapse of Game of Thrones.
yes.
You know, I've always been like a podcast fan, you know, Rogan, Opie and Anthony, Burr, any of these comedians. I'm a big, you know, avid consumer of that type of stuff. But I didn't know about what was going on YouTube until till Game of Thrones destroyed, cratered. And I'm like, there has to be someone out there who gets this, who sees what I'm seeing. Like there has to be. I cannot just sit here alone in my apartment, like watching my favorite thing completely collapse. And the first person I found was a critical drinker.
Funny enough, that's how I found you,
Really?
kind of in a roundabout way. So during the lockdown, I of 2020, I I went on this YouTube binge, and I can't remember exactly how I went down this rabbit hole, but eventually I found the critical drinker, and I watched one of his reviews. I think it was like his large breakdown on like how he would fix The Last Jedi or
Yes, that's a good
something
video. I remember that one.
like that. And then I found Gary from Nerdrotic, and I had no idea who he was, but I watched a few of his videos, found out that he did live streaming, and then so I started tuning into a few of his live streams, discovered Friday Night Tights. I joined their Discord server, and I was just kind of hanging in there. And Eric K, who was one of the mods in there, dropped a link to your channel and kind of, I guess, what you would call, what people would say, the Friday Night Tights after show. Some
Yeah,
people would kind
we
of
say
call it.
that.
So I just
We-
dropped in there around Christmas time of last year, and I like a lot of what you're doing, and so I just figured I would have you on, since we're both kind of the smaller channels in that community, so to speak.
sure. Yeah.
So
Well, it's I appreciate you having me on. And it is I found that the nerd erotic community is a great like hive of new content creators. I mean, that's pretty much where I found everyone who's come on the Friday after the after show. MF for Cocktail Lounge on Friday nights at 8:30 Central. That's pretty much where I found everybody there. I mean, Vigilante Williamson, who's my like basically my podcast partner. We have a Wednesday show called The Culture Crime Fighters. We do it. We switch channels. Go on my channel one week, his channel the next. We also put it out as a podcast on like iTunes, Spotify, all that. But I met
Mhm.
him on a Gary like member stream. That's
Yeah.
how I crossed paths with him.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been on a member stream a few times, as well. I think you and I kind of chatted, about that. It's funny because I've been doing podcasting for probably 15 years now.
Wow.
I started when I was about 14 and didn't really get anywhere for, like, the first 5 years, and then, I was a big fan of Andrew Breitbart, who, was pretty famous in kind of the conservative-ish circles, and around that time, I also started listening to Dennis Miller's radio show, and then pretty much after I pretty much a year into me listening to Dennis Miller was when Andrew Breitbart died,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of on a whim, I started emailing people at Breitbart who he worked with, and one of those people was Ben Shapiro, and this was before Ben Shapiro was Ben Shapiro as
Sure.
we know him. So, um, that was kind of my first, I guess, big boost, and then, I just kind of focused on politics really up until 2016 when kind of the culture war and politics really kind of seemed to crossfade. And then after the 2020 election, I just kind of got bored with politics strictly. So I've been diving more into the culture stuff. And I've always known that like the culture war was important. I just didn't really know kind of where my place in the space was. So I just like to talk to different people in that space more or less. And the funny thing I find out like Gary is that like a lot of people label him as like right wing or something like that, but he's not. And I think it's really hard to kind of pin people down these days because if you're not politically correct, you're automatically labeled as right wing, even if you're not. So
Yeah, that's a great point, man. It really is hard to pin people down nowadays because what does any of that mean anymore? What is being on the right mean today? Like who and who's the one defining it? Are you a card carrying Republican? Like I would say I'm not, but I'm very willing to embrace some of the ideals that come from the right that I think, are interesting or necessary right now. And the same thing goes for the left. I've been listening to a lot of James Lindsay recently. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a frequent Rogan guest, and he's written a few books. I think he's a former I don't know if he's a college professor, but he has a very academic background. He actually became famous for submitting papers, his grievance studies to these papers to feminist literatures, feminist collegiate magazines. But basically, what he did was he took passages from Mein Kampf and replaced Jews with men, and then that was like exactly what they wanted to hear. So it was the kind of thing that kind of made him a viral sensation, like Jordan Peterson or Brett Weinstein. And I've been listening to a lot of his books, and he is what you'd consider a classical liberal, but he fights. Oh, did you see Luke?
yeah,
My cat just popped up there. Hey, buddy, Luke. He's a
we
he's a
we
co-star.
love cats and dogs on the show, so
Oh,
it's
right on.
fine.
Perfect.
So
But James Lindsay is what you'd consider a classical liberal, but the people who are what you'd call the left now would absolutely not count him on their side. So it is a very amorphous thing now. It's how do you define where people are? And to me, I find it less and less important to like identify that. I don't really care. I just kind of care more about your character and your principles.
So, if I may ask you, So I guess where do you kind of align on the spectrum? And is that one of the reasons why you didn't really feel successful in Hollywood um, when
Well,
you
I'm
were
I'm
there?
decidedly anti-critical theory. So anything that kind of falls under the anti-critical theory umbrella, I
Sure.
almost immediately have a problem with it. Now, the thing is, a lot of what they believe, in my opinion, does have some validity to it. It's just really cynically misinterpreted or negatively portrayed or, cherry picked to look, in a certain what light. So I don't know. I mean, I try to respect everyone's point of view. There's like hot button issues that I kind of understand both sides.
Yeah.
Um, I guess it comes down to more like where my principles align. I'm sure that there's people out there that would consider me conservative. I guess I don't, but I don't care. Like it's like if that's what you want to call me, call me. I don't care. Whatever it is you want to describe me as, is fine. But yeah, I don't know if I don't have like a mentality of where I see myself as far as on the spectrum, but I'm open to like lots of different ideas.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of where I am, and I think where a lot of people are. I mean, I'm registered Republican, and I hold a lot of views that I guess now would be considered conservative, but like as far as like social issues like gay marriage and whatnot, like you know, I don't really care, what you do, in your private life, as long as you're not harming anyone and as long as, everyone is consenting and, over age and, of
Yeah.
age and whatnot. But, as far as like this whole like, thing of like the morality policing that the right, used to do, I'm against that. And now it seems that the far left is doing that. And there seems to be it's weird because the two extremes almost seem to be more or less the same in a sense, just for different reasons.
Yeah, they
The
mirror
the
each other.
the left wants reparations for racism in the past, and it's unreasonable on their end. The whole critical theory, as you put it, and then you have the far alt right people who also are into critical theory, but they think that the white race needs reparations for things, and it's just really weird how we
There's
got to
a
this point.
there's a great sketch by the comedian Ryan Long. Do you know who he is?
Oh yeah, I know who Ryan Long is.
He's got that woke and racism and how they both agree and like they're friends, but they have like the same ideas, but they're just kind of like just a little twisted, like it's just slightly
Yeah,
alt. It's so good. It like sums up exactly what you're just pointing out. It's like it really is just the same. Like it's the extension of it. I mean, I read that book by James Lindsay called Cynical Theories, and if you and once I began to understand like their philosophy, like where they're coming from, they really are racists. I mean, they
yeah.
basically say this group of people does this group of people does that, and this is the experience of this person, and this is the experience of that person, and they separate them very decisively into groups. So I don't know what else you could call that other than racism. I mean, you're leaving room for absolutely no individuality amongst identity groups. So what that's racism. I don't know what else that could be.
You're you're absolutely right. And I think now the other thing that we have to deal with is, cancel culture and, which really I don't think is anything really new. It's just because of the internet there's more of a spotlight on it. But like one of the things that I know you were talking about yesterday on, your stream was the whole thing with Joe Rogan. And I haven't had a chance to talk at it because I only do one or two shows per week and this is that. But as far as the Rogan thing, I'm kind of curious to know what you think about all that kind of
Hey,
starting up.
it's an interesting thing because there was a pretty big development today that I haven't looked into just because I honestly just didn't want to. But apparently someone did like a supercut of things that Joe Rogan has said that make him appear very racist. He's not. I would confidently say all I've listened to hundreds of
Yeah.
hours of Rogan. I have no belief that he's a racist, but they make it look like that. And Rogan, actually apologized for what he said. I think he tried to contextualize it and sort of explain where he was coming from, but also he apologized. And
which
yesterday, oh,
which
sorry.
which personally, no, sorry to interrupt. Personally,
No, no,
I don't think apologizing to the mob is ever good, especially
I
when you're a comedian.
completely agree with you. I think it's usually a misstep because all it kind of does is just give them a little bit more power. And that's more what they're after than anything. They don't really care about the plight of Black people. It's just more about control. So him doing that. And then yesterday, 70 or so episodes of Joe Rogan Experience just disappeared from Spotify with no explanation.
Yeah, it's I haven't looked too much into that, but like enough people have said that I'm kind of like I'm just kind of like, wow, that's a little surprising. And part of the reason why it's surprising is I've actually so a few years ago I actually um one of the one of the left-wing Twitter mobs actually tried to kind of cancel my podcast and get it
Oh,
removed from
oh, congratulations. You made it.
Spotify. Yeah, so they tried to get me it was like a weird mix of like lefties and then alt-right people that were like trying to get this thing
He's not racist enough.
right. Well,
This guy likes too many people.
it was basically like I criticized one of their one of their favorite personalities, and so they me and a few other friends. It's kind of a long story, but long story short, they just started like spamming iTunes and whatnot with bad reviews, and then tried
Really?
reporting it to Spotify. And I actually got an email from Spotify saying, "Hey, we think that someone is just trying to like massively, like leave bad reviews." I don't know the technical term for that, but they were basically like,
Review bombing?
yeah, review bombing. Yeah, that's the term I'm using. So they said, we're gonna lock this down for a bit and wait until things kind of settle out. There's not anything really controversial.
Oh, huh. I don't know where Sam went. He just sort of disappeared off his own. Oh,
Uh
we're back.
oh yeah, apparently we just lost connection.
Oh, are we on?
Yeah, we're on again. It just refreshed, it looked like.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well,
Hopefully the people in the chat can kind of confirm that. I have no idea what happened. But anyway, as I was saying, basically this mob review bombing and Spotify, more or less kept me on. And I'm a nobody. I only have 700 and something subscribers on YouTube, and I get more listens on the audio podcast, but still, I'm a relative nobody. So the fact that they were willing to keep me on was great. So I've always kind of vouched for Spotify in that
hmm.
sense, Spotify and Anchor. But now with this, I'm kind of wondering, now with them getting so much publicity, I mean, that was 5 years ago when that happened. And now I'm wondering, are they going to start clamping down on more and more people now that they've got so much more attention?
I think this Rogan story is bigger than it seems. I think it's more than just like a 1 day story. Like this story's now been going for like a week or so. And I think it started just kind of being like, oh, this is like something that happened. He addressed the COVID misinformation or whatever. He didn't back down, but he, addressed it. We talked about that on Wednesday, me and Vigilante did. And then and now yesterday's story with the 74 episodes, and now today, this to me feels like coordinated. It feels like there's like people trying to cancel and deplatform him, and it's the amount of people who are growing in, oddly enough, in support of Neil Young is actually getting bigger. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Michelle and Barack Obama decided they don't want to be on Spotify or something like that. And when the former president, whatever you think of him, set like makes an action like that, I don't know what like Spotify. That's a tough, very tough spot for them to be in, and it's a lot of money on the line. So I think we're going to see. I think this story is going to continue to develop, and I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, well, I heard something about that, but up until you said something, I had no idea if that was actually true or not. The
I'm,
the
I neither
funny
do
thing
I.
of it is though is even though Obama has a podcast, and even though he's the former president of the United States, like nobody listens to his podcast as far as I can tell. I'm not even saying it as a dig. I'm just saying that like nobody, um, maybe other than hardcore Obama fans,
Yeah, who is the
listens.
audience for that? I mean, he's not going to say anything radical enough to satisfy their base, even if his actions in the past may have reflected that. He's not going to give them a soundbite they can use against him.
Right?
Um,
Yeah.
and then just a normal person, like he's not going to be vulnerable enough to be a good podcast host to where you'd want to listen to. So I have no idea who the audience for that is.
And
Obama
he's
stands.
and he's co-hosting with Bruce Springsteen, and I mean I listened to an episode and it's not bad, but it's like they talk about like they talk like when they grew up like in their respective like hometowns. Like it's a very it's very milk toast. Like it's
Hmm.
not and hey, if you want to do a milk toast podcast, that fine, but like
Moving the needle.
he's not moving the needle. He's not doing anything. So the fact that he's like threatening to leave, like if I were Spotify, I would kind of be like, ah, okay. I mean,
From
I
a
like,
biz- Yeah, from a business perspective, you're right. They're not going to
yeah,
lose a lot of people, but from an optics perspective, how that
yeah,
story would translate and how the press would use that story to leverage their position that Rogan is dangerous is that's an issue.
and the other problem I see too is like I've asked people how Rogan is dangerous, and they say, well, he spreads misinformation, and I'm like, how? Well, he has people who don't believe in the vaccine on, and I'm like, well, how is having them on and allowing them to express their opinions, how is that in and of itself dangerous? Because he doesn't always agree with people on things, even when he does have people on, and it's weird to me how this whole thing of like having a conversation is now, even if you don't like someone, is now considered blasphemy almost.
Yeah, no,
It's
that
weird.
you nailed it. It's blasphemous. It's the yeah, I can't recommend that critical cynical theories book more because that's exactly what the conclusion I drew was that this is essentially political evangelism. It's not it's not really based in fact and it's not up for debate. Like if you whatever their conclusions are, you have to agree with them even if you could prove or you'd have enough facts to argue against it. That's off the table. Verboten. You don't do that. And so the more that worldview has taken hold in media, big tech, entertainment, government, the more dangerous it becomes to question it because it's growing steam and it's growing power and it's growing influence. And it's not a far cry from socialist regimes that had political re-education camps and would kill intellectuals, who disagreed. It's really the same concept spiritually. So that's I think that to me that's the reason why it's a dangerous conversation, misinformation. It's you're essentially crimes against the state is what it works out to.
Yeah. The other weird thing too, someone brought this to my attention like 2 weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to discuss it. But we're talking about people canceling Joe Rogan. But the other thing that's interesting too is now they're also canceling people they're canceling dead people now too. And
Oh yeah,
that's another weird phenomenon. I'm not sure if you heard anything about this, but I guess there's, and I haven't watched it, but I guess there's like a 12-part like documentary series on A&E that's supposed to make like it's basically a smear campaign against Hugh Hefner.
Yeah.
It's from some of the former like I'm not even sure if they were playmates, but former half girlfriends who like allege that like he raped them or like forced them into some weird things, and A&E like promoted it as like a big takedown thing, and when in reality like all these Playboy staff members and a few of the playmates have come out and said no.
Really?
This stuff like this never happened.
Wow. I had not heard that. That's interesting.
So it's interesting, and I say what you will about Hef, but I do find interesting that now they've been going after him because back in the day, like Playboy used to be kind of an open forum for opinion. They used to have like the left right debate in the magazine, and I almost wonder if that's one of the reasons why they're going
Hmm.
after him, was because he was free speech. I don't know.
My
It could just
interpretation would most likely be toxic masculinity would be their aim. Um,
yeah
However, it's interesting because him and Larry Flint, not so much Hef, but I'm fairly certain he was involved. They were instrumental in a lot of free speech battles in, like, I think the 60s, 70s,
yeah
Supreme Court stuff that basically changed the laws of the United States forever. And, it's from these two guys who, do porn. So, yeah, that is interesting. I can't really weigh in on much more than that because I haven't seen the documentary, and I don't really know
me
much
either.
about Hef except I just have an impression of, his, Playboy, as it were, lifestyle. But I don't know. I mean, maybe they've got a point. I'd have to look into it more. You know,
I
Depends on who's
yeah
making it. I just,
I I just find it more interesting that like, okay, the man's been dead for 5 years at this point. Like, okay, it's more of like why cancel him now, and that's what I find weird. Like they're running out of people to cancel, so now they're literally digging up corpses and that all that. It's weird.
hmm yeah. I guess it just none of it surprises me anymore because I understand a lot of the aims of critical theory is
Yeah,
to basically undo and destroy everything that came before it, no matter what it is. So it's kind of like they have to remake everything. Um, Playboy's been pretty woke of late, though, which is interesting
yeah,
too. Like they have like they had a trans man, or I don't know what I'm supposed to say, but it was a guy on the cover,
yeah.
and that is like, this is Playboy, this is a men's magazine. That's not your target audience. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure where that's coming from at all. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's follow the progressive narrative at like at all costs.
Yes,
And I mean same thing with like maybe not quite in the same vein, but like I've also heard you say on your podcast, and this is also something I kind of wanted to talk to you about because when I tune into the Vigilante, the show that you and Vigilante do, and pardon me, I can't remember the name.
culture crime fighters.
Okay, yeah, when I turned into Culture Crime Fighters, you were talking how like you don't watch TV anymore,
Yeah, I
or
find it challenging.
watch movies, even movies that you generally like. You don't really watch. You say you find it challenging. Can you kind of expand on that a bit? I guess. Or
I think part of it's personal. I think it's partially just being personally turned off from Hollywood in general, as far as just having like a bad impression of the system and the town and the people and the ladders you have to climb. The whole thing just kind of has left a sour taste in my mouth. But beyond that, you know, I don't get enough olive branches from the creatives in Hollywood to kind of leave a mentally an open mind to people other than are in their little club. And so when I'm watching something, I'm just like, so these are the people that think I'm a toxic monster for
Yeah.
disagreeing with their worldview. It's like, well, why the hell am I going to watch what they put out? Like, who cares? It's just fine. I find it like less interesting. I just like, I don't. And then the fact that I'm even thinking about that while I'm consuming the content is draining. And I just don't want to feel that way. I'm like, I'm watching this for entertainment, escapism. This is not doing it for me. So I'm going to put on a podcast of someone I like, or I'm going to watch or play a video game that I know will, satisfy that escapism urge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just find it kind of just sort of draining. So I'm like, yeah, why am I putting myself through this?
I mean, I've it's interesting you say that because I'm more or less like on an 80s, movie kick, and I haven't for like the past year and a half, 2 years. Like I've even been watching like B movies that were like considered bad because even those are good considered to the stuff that's out there now. And I mean, some of them may be cheesy as hell, but it's better than being preached at every 5 minutes. And it's like you said, the I find that the more often than not the agenda takes me out of things as well.
Yeah, it's boring. It's really just boring. Like I made a post about that, years ago, and I said something like I never turn on anything and hope that what I'm watching reflects my values or my
Yeah.
or my politics, because that's propaganda and that's boring, and it is. It's I as much as like I voted for Trump in 2020.
So
I
so
did
did
in
I.
26. Yeah, I did in 2016 because I thought it was all a smokescreen. I thought it was all a fake psyop. I didn't believe in it at all. But then I really thought he did a good job, and I thought he deserved another crack at it. But oh shit, I lost my point. Oh well.
Well, it's funny that you bring up Trump because like I voted for him in 2016, but I was kind of hesitant because when I was growing up, he was the guy who did The Apprentice, and so when he ran at first, I'm like, this guy has to be a joke. He's only doing this for publicity and whatnot.
I
And
thought it was like the producers where they were just trying to create the worst possible candidate that like easily defeatable, and
yeah,
then it actually backfired in their
I
face and he
I
won.
I thought the same thing. And then what happened was, as the campaign kind of progressed, I'm like, oh shit, this guy actually, might have a shot. And then, when it came down to like between him and, you know, but when it came down between him and Hillary, I was like, okay, well, there's no way in hell I'm voting for that bitch.
Right.
So, and I had said at the beginning of the, uh, primary races in 2015 that I would vote for whoever it was going to be, regardless of who it was, basically facing off against Hillary, just because I find her a despicable human being,
Yeah, she's pretty repulsive.
personally. And like I would have voted for like an empty paint can if that had been the contender. But I think Trump. Here's the interesting thing about Trump. People say that Trump is, the cause of all this strife, but really, I think it's always been there. He just kind of unearthed a lot of it and exhumed and exposed what that rot was. And I'm not saying he's perfect, but he did a better job than I think a lot of people gave him credit for.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he did a much better job than pretty much the entire mainstream media would be willing to admit. As far as the divide thing is concerned, you could say he created the divide, but it's because the woke stuff he entertained absolutely none of it. Where every other president would at least kind of postulate and pretend and sort of act as if they gave a shit. He just was absolutely not. Refused to give in to any of it. And it was, I think that's what infuriated them. And that additionally, he wasn't an establishment guy. So he didn't have to go through all the BS that a traditional politician would have to go through. And he didn't suffer the media. And they all just collectively were like, you're not allowed to do any of those things. So we're going to freak out for the next 4 years. And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, well, the other thing that was weird too was, um, so I was working for, I wasn't working for, like, technically I wasn't getting paid, but I was writing for a college Republican, like, blogging site, and they went the never Trump route, that sect, and I along with a few other people were basically like, well, yeah, I don't necessarily like Trump's attitude, but like, are you serious? If it comes down between like him and Hillary, like, you can't be serious. You're going to, abstain or, vote for Hillary, like, as opposed to him, like why? And basically, I was asked to leave because of that. So that actually drove me to like Trump even more, because I'm like, okay, well, if he's pissing off the Republicans too, then you know there has to be something here.
Yeah.
So
I think their campaign of hate, if you will, all it did was polarize people against them, whomever, whether it's Republicans or the left, and just kind of made Trump's base even stronger and more resilient. And I don't think anyone expected that. The thing with the whole Trump thing is that there was so much propaganda against him from the start. I mean, I wasn't that into politics at the time, but I remember the first thing I'd heard about Trump while he was running, this is the first I'd ever heard he was even running, was this guy's the worst candidate ever. That was like the first thing I heard. I didn't even know he was up for running for president. But the first information I got was that he's terrible. And I'm like, when anyone leads with that kind of an opinion of like what I'm supposed to think before I've even had a chance to understand what it is you're even talking about, I'm immediately suspicious.
yeah, and I mean, and the fact that like even during the primary election, like the fact that like they spent all this time going after him in particular, like, yeah, I get it. He's a bit of a cartoon character and
100%.
whatnot in some ways, but also that's why you have to love him too, because it's like, if they're going to pick Hillary, who everyone hates, then we might as well pick Trump, because it's just going to be the most absurd shit show of an election, and it was, but and honestly,
It was
I
great.
was I was shocked that he won. I mean, like,
Oh, shocked.
I got up
Couldn't
on
believe it.
election day, and I was like, well, this was a fun ride, but you know, they're gonna rig it and she's gonna win, and I guess I'm gonna have to pour myself a bottle of Maker's Mark and just, go to bed sad, and then when he won, I remember, like, I stayed up to watch, and when he won, I was like, holy fucking shit. Is this for real? I couldn't believe it. Just I don't I never went to bed. I never went to bed that night. I believe I stayed up like 24 hours straight, just because I was like, I can't believe that this is happening.
Yeah.
So,
My thought
um,
was when he won was, wow, I guess anyone actually can be president.
yeah,
I didn't believe that. And now it's true. This guy won. I was shocked. And I tell you, I didn't vote for him. I don't even remember who I voted for. I voted for some third party like protest vote because I was just like, I don't believe in either one of these people. But the moment when I got excited that Trump won was when I opened up Facebook and all the people like in my Hollywood community who antagonized me for disagreeing with their ideas, or had all these prejudices against me because I was a straight white male, and they were just generally hostile to any ideas that aren't their own. They were all miserable, and I was like, this is great. Like, I love this. This is amazing. And it was like like, oh no, I can't. Like, oh, what's the world? I was just like, this is terrific. Like, wow, I think I like this Trump guy. This is great.
Yeah, I had a I so it was funny because I actually had like a second cousin write me like a long ass, probably I'm going to say like a page and a half roughly length Facebook message. And keep in mind, like, this is someone who I hadn't even, like, I see her at family reunions, maybe like every, once every 5 years or something like that. Like, we're not super close or anything. But she wrote me like a page and a half letter basically saying that she was disowning me and that she couldn't believe that me, of all people, could vote for such a monster like Trump. And I'm like, well, I'm a registered Republican. And so like what why are you shocked? And and second of all, high after 5 years, like, we haven't spoken, and now you're disowning and crying because you know I'm because I voted for the orange bad man. Like, wow. And then when Biden won, she DM'd me and like tried to bring me back into the fold, and I'm like,
Mm.
no, fuck you. You know, you made your decision. You
Yeah,
should
and
have.
it's like, now that you got your way, now we can be friends. Is that how it works? Like, my character as a person is not important to you, is it? It's my politics. That's how you define your worldview. I lost a lot of friends in LA. One in particular who I was really close with, and him and his girlfriend, man, they just got more and more woke, and me having my own opinions and my own ideas became more and more of a problem. And I found one day I was just like, dude, all we ever do is argue. That's like all I ever do with is argue with you. Like, I feel like you don't respect me. I feel like we're not friends. Like, it's like, this is like, you are taking this sort of political battle into our friendship and making it about that, and it's really difficult to deal with. Like, it's a very hard thing to deal. And he just kind of, I don't know, it was all or nothing, and it just it ended up ending our friendship, and it really hurt. It really sucked because he was a good friend, but they just became insufferable. And it was the thing about, because I would talk to my mom about this, right? I'd like, bitch, and she'd be like, just don't talk about it. I'm like, I don't ever bring it up. It's just, it was always just, I'm assaulted with their opinion and their worldview all the time.
Yeah.
Every social circumstances, in my acting classes, at work. It's just, it was a flood of their worldview, their information. And it's like, you just feel stifled and you're drowning, and it's like you just have to kind of push back just for your own sanity. But that was a problem. I found one. We found one. He doesn't, he's witch, burn him. And so it was it just became intolerable. So I had to leave. I left, went to Texas about a little less than a year ago, and I've
Oh,
been here ever since.
oh, really? So you're in Texas now?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
It's funny because uh up until after I graduated high school, well, I'm a Colorado native, and then I moved to Florida with my folks. And at first everyone was like, why are you moving to Florida? There's nothing but old people and beaches there. And people thought I was crazy. And now, with everything with the coof and whatnot, everyone's like, Sam, you're a genius. And it's I mean, that whole thing is weird too, because I mean I mean, in regards to the whole, thing with COVID and whatnot too, and I'm not spreading misinformation. I'm not saying whether or not you should be, vax or not YouTube. I'm not saying any of that, but
You're not a doctor.
I'm not a doctor. We're not medical professionals. We're just two guys chatting on the internet. But um, I find the fact, and again, this goes back to Rogan. I find the fact just like having a conversation about not even the vaccine, but the mandate is what I have a problem with, and the fact that that is considered controversial now is mind boggling. These are the same people who scream "my body, my choice" whenever it comes to abortion, but yet when it comes to taking a vaccine, it's you must do it or else you want grandma to die. It's a very weird attitude to have, I find.
I think it's collectivism versus individuality. I think is why they can be so hypocritical, because when it's the collective, even when they're saying my body, my choice, they're not even necessarily saying my body. They're saying like the women, our bodies, like we can't tell us what to do. Not necessarily me. And it's the same thing with, I think, the whole coof thing. It's like, it's like, oh, you're putting me at risk. You're putting my family. It's about, you're supposed to do it for all of us. It's this collectivist thing. You're not really supposed to disagree or have your own ideas or your own opinions. That's dangerous. That's misinformation. So I think that's why they're so aggressively hypocritical, right? When they throw it out there and you're like, that's blatantly against a principle you hold super dear. But in this instance, that principle is gone. So how can you stand there and rally these things? But I think it's because ultimately it doesn't really. It's just the narrative. The narrative, the same narrative was just a few years ago. Pharmaceutical companies were the worst things on the planet. They were horrible. They were creating overpriced drugs. They have all these lawsuits. They're terrible. This is why we need socialized medicine, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward now, Pfizer is on par with like a cancer institute. they're just doing good work for the people. They're just
Yeah,
trying their best. It's like, when the hell did you think that?
which is funny because again, like pharmaceuticals are something that I guess I would kind of consider myself somewhat of a liberal when it comes to pharmaceuticals in the sense that I do lots of alternative medicine. Like I'm more into that type of stuff. And look, obviously you know there's some effectiveness for traditional medicine, obviously, but I'm into alternative medicine, and I think it's weird that the same people who were questioning, like you said, big pharma 5 years ago are now vehemently saying you must get the jab. The other thing too is when people ask, why haven't you gotten vaccinated yet? The one thing I always refer back to is I had the flu vaccine when I was in high school, like my junior year, and it was the only year I got the flu
Hmm.
vaccine because I thought it was like a particularly virulent flu strain that year, so I got it to be safe. I wound up getting the flu and like sick as a dog for like 3 weeks because of that flu shot, I think. And so ever since then, I'm like, I'm not doing that again. Doesn't mean it won't work for other people. I just find that it doesn't work for me. And so because of that, I've been, kind of cautious with the whole COVID thing. But that doesn't mean that I don't think other people shouldn't be allowed to get it if they, want to. And
Individual liberty. I
yeah,
mean, that's the crux of the whole argument. I think, like, the Canadian trucker thing is a great example of that. I would, they're resisting there in Ottawa at that nation's capital, and and I think when they mobilized was when it became a mandate. Before that, there was people that didn't like it, but there wasn't this sort of political action. And apparently, most of the members of that convoy are vaccinated. They don't have a problem with the vaccination. They have a problem with the government overreach and the mandate, and that's where they drew the line. And I think that's where a lot of people have an issue. Even people who got it, they're like, okay, but you shouldn't force other people to get it. Why would you force people? Like, that's not that's not a freedom. You've now are forcing someone to take a medication. That's like Nuremberg stuff. Like what is this? What's going on here?
Yeah, and I mean, and they're conveniently leaving the fact that all those truckers are vaccinated
Hmm.
too. They're leaving that out in there and have been making it seem like these are all anti-vaxxers that think that the vaccine is going to like that you're going to get like five and obviously I think some of the vaccine conspiracies are nuts too. I don't think aliens are going to communicate with you if you get the vaccine. I don't think that
That would be
I don't
great
think
if that was the
I
case.
don't
I'd definitely get it.
I don't yeah, right?
I have to
I
talk to
don't
them.
think I don't think that you're going to be able to pick up 5G signals, although that would also improve my although if that were the case, that would actually be helpful because I don't get too good coverage where I am, so to have like 5G in my arm, that would just be great. But
That whole
um,
5G thing, that is the weirdest one. It was like, where the hell did that come from? Like, I never looked into it. I never read any QAnon papers, but I just was like, what? Like, why that
yeah,
one? That was so out of nowhere.
so the QAnon thing is weird because you have like the really weird lefties, right? But then you have the QAnon people, and so the QAnon people they got a hold of the show's Gmail account and they just started emailing me like these random um things like that JFK Jr. Is still alive and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And I'm like, okay, obviously there are nuts on the left, but also like how are people honestly buying into the whole QAnon thing? And
Yes.
I mean,
Yes, they are.
yeah. And obviously, that's what happened with January 6th. And I tell people that, I don't I don't agree with the Capitol riot and what it went down, but I understand why a lot of people were there to protest, the validity of the election. But the people who stormed the Capitol, like that was a group of just like 15 people who were just absolutely unhinged. You
Unhinged
know,
and arguably encouraged to do so. You
yeah,
know, there's the video of the cops opening the gate and encouraging people through. I mean, there's the video of the shaman guy getting an actual tour where the guy like the guard or whomever is explaining what the building is and all this stuff.
yeah,
And one thing I heard today, I was listening to James Lindsay on Rogan. I guess he was just on there like last week. Apparently, at the rally, Alex Jones was there encouraging people not to go in. They're saying,
right,
don't do it,
yeah.
don't fall for it. And I've never heard anyone mention that until now. And it's over a year later. I've never heard anyone say that one time.
Right after the January 6th thing happened, I so so it was weird because with all January 6th thing when it was being planned, and I'm not saying this to be pompous, but I knew going into it that there was something. I smelled something kind of fishy about it. I kind of figured that they were going to try something, so I put out a video and I told viewers don't go to this thing
Hmm.
because it's not going like I just have a funny feeling that it's not going to something's going to happen. It's going to be like Charlottesville all over again. And sure enough, stuff did go down. What's interesting is
Indeed.
they were saying that Alex Jones was one of the instigators, but I found video of Alex Jones also saying this thing is it could be a psyop. It doesn't seem legit. And then he disavowed QAnon multiple times and also called out the QAnon, the shaman guy and disavowed him. And I put that up on my channel as well. And granted, I think I don't really know what to think about Alex Jones. I think that he's right on some stuff, and I think that he's generally he's just weird and entertaining. But
I found, the episode of Rogan, talking a lot about Rogan tonight, but the episode of Rogan
sure.
where he's with him and Tim Dillon are on, and Rogan is forcibly stopping Alex to stop. What are you talking about? Let me look that up. Because he was just barreling forward, and then the amount of things that Alex was referencing in like his tirade that had actually happened that were accurate. I was like, wow, like I thought at best he was kind of misinterpreting a lot of history or was, kind of taking isolated incidences. But when I saw that, I was like, those are all Googleable and they're true. Wow, this guy is talking a lot more truth than I was even slightly willing to, what's the word? Like, I was just surprised how accurate it was. I was like, whoa, that's not what I expected.
Yeah, and it's funny because, again, talking all about Rogan, I used to think that Alex Jones was, you know, simply a quack. And
Hmm.
then the first time he went on Rogan's podcast, I think in like 2015, when he was talking like interdimensional child molester demons or something like that. I mean, the guy does have comedic chops, whether or not those are intentional or not. But I'm like, oh, okay, to have Rogan sit down and talk with this guy about his background and understand where he's at least coming from, like this is the type of stuff that I can get behind. and
Yeah,
uh
same.
and also, Adam Carolla does the same thing too. I'm also a big fan of Adam Carolla, and he doesn't. I mean, obviously, it's funny because when I first started listening to podcasts, like way back in high school, he was kind of the number one, and then Rogan took the spot fairly quickly. And like I told someone the other day, like going going back to the whole Rogan controversy. Like I remember when Rogan would just be on like a webcam with like Brian Redband and his buddies and just talking like dildos and sex jokes
Hmm.
and whatnot. Like that's what podcasting was back in the day.
Yeah.
And so, that's the other thing. Like this whole thing of like Rogan's a racist. No, he's not. He's a comedian, and
Hmm.
you know some some jokes are funny and in context or out of context even.
Yeah, no, he's always been a funny guy. I think over the years not that he changed, but like what he does on the show was a little less focused on just dicking around with his friends. He still
Yeah.
does do that. He still will have like three comics on and just get drunk and high and mess around. And that's really, that's entertaining too. But then he'll have these extraordinarily pensive conversations. And I think Rogan is really responsible for this rise of this sort of intellectual like renaissance we're having right now with all these unique voices out there and people who are articulating against this sort of the critical theory thing and this sort of overreach of government. Because before that, I didn't know of anyone like Jordan Peterson or Brett Weinstein. I'd never heard of these guys before, and I don't know how I would have without him. But you find this guy Jordan Peterson with this kind of weird Canadian voice, and he just like is blowing my mind. I'm like, that's exactly what I'm seeing. Like, I didn't know that, but what you're saying is accurate. And it was like, wow, it was like a breath of fresh air. And I think I couldn't have been the only one. So I imagine like that contributed to this sort of blossoming of all these new, like this new intellectual internet renaissance that we're going through right now. And I think it's like he's directly responsible. And I think that that's a good thing. And he's a good broadcaster because of that.
Well, and I think the other thing too is like he references like Howard Stern being one of his influences, and Howard Stern basically recently came out and said fuck you, and then had the audacity to say I'm still the king of all media. And it's like no one under 45 listens, and I'm being generous with that. Like, no, Like no one I know listens to Howard.
I don't know anybody.
The last time I remember Howard Stern being relevant is when he had Jenna Jameson on or something, and that was like 20 years ago, or something like no one
No.
knows who Stern is.
He
Who
hasn't been
Stern
relevant
is.
for years. I remember listening to Opie and Anthony years back. This was a while ago. This was like 10 or so years ago. Excuse me. They played a clip of him on his show, like adopting puppies or something. Like he was running like a puppy adoption thing, and you're just like, what? Like this is Howard Stern, like this controversial, edgy guy, this shock jock, king of all media guy is like, yeah, we got a lot of good cats and puppies here, and it's like that has its place. I don't know if it's the Howard Stern show though. You're like, what? So he's
Well,
been for a while.
granted, people say, oh, Howard Stern broke down barriers. Okay, and I can appreciate that, like from a historical perspective, as someone who's into broadcasting history and whatnot. But so did Rush Limbaugh. So did Opie and Opie and Anthony. And I in particular, I never listened to Opie and Anthony much, but I do subscribe to Compound Media.
Oh, really?
I I still think I don't think Anthony Cumia is as edgy as he used to be, partially because everything is behind a paywall, and also maybe just because my humor is so dark and so I've just been numbed to a lot of the shock things now that I'm just kind of like you know like you said, nothing shocks me anymore. So
Yeah, I am a big fan of Anthony. I'm not a subscriber of Compound Media right now. I have been in the past, but I just don't have the time to dedicate to. There's so many different platforms.
yeah,
I just don't. But I kind of know what you mean about Anthony. Like I still think Anthony is a very funny guy. However, I just think he was much better with Jim Norton. The other comedian that he was
yeah,
on
oh
the air
yeah,
with.
I know. Jim Norton is an odd guy. I don't really his sense of humor is I don't really want to say I don't like it. I just don't. It's not my cup of tea. Like
Yeah.
although the fact that he still pisses so many people off with his humor, I do kind of like that he's just out there still like rabbling
Yeah.
people, and I do find his Chip Chipperson character to be funny.
Chip.
So in fact, it's funny. I mentioned Dennis Miller. I know someone who used to work for Dennis Miller
Really?
um who also knows Jim
Oh, really?
Norton. I don't know if he knows him well, but yeah. So I mean, that whole thing is interesting with kind of comedians being the arbiters of kind of defending the culture now too. I find
It's
so.
interesting because I don't think that's an incredibly new phenomenon because you had like Carlin guys, right? Like in the 80s or Bill Hicks, who were saying these critical things about society that you weren't hearing anywhere else that were clearly well thought out, they're very insightful and then funny. There's people out there who are very smart and very sharp and insightful, but when they're on their own, it's just kind of like ugh, you feel like you're in a college lecture. You're just like, okay, like this is interesting, but it's boring. Whereas when a comedian can really capture something like that, they have this entertainment instinct. They know how to keep a crowd engaged. So when they're making a point, they usually do it very elegantly and very concisely and in an entertaining manner. So I think it's a weird phenomenon, but a lot of comedians I think have kind of been lightning rods, excuse me, for promoting, like for really advancing the cultural conversation. And I think that's a great outlet, but as good outlet as any.
I I think it's a good outlet. My one concern now, though, kind of with Kanye is, and again, going back to the whole thing with Rogan, is now we're starting to see, Rogan getting tamped down a bit, and I'm almost wondering, like, will more comedians, like, start to start to self censor, and I hope they don't. I really,
It's
that,
possible,
yeah.
but controversy sells. It is a risk. You run a risk of people digging into your past or digging into like all your podcasts and trying to take your
Oh
career
yeah.
away from you. But I don't know. I see a lot more. I think what's the market is buying is more honesty and more personal insight and personal opinion on what the cultural what's going on in culture right now than the kind of just regurgitating woke like standpoints. I don't think people are buying that anymore. Like the Trevor Noahs, like if Trevor Noah wasn't entrenched in an institution, I don't think he'd be a relevant voice because he just says what you're supposed to say. And that's
I don't
boring.
I don't think he even is relevant. I mean, like you said, you don't watch movies. I don't really watch, that many current movies. I will say I did go and see the latest Spider-Man movie, and I actually enjoyed that strictly because it was nostalgia, and also because they didn't really push anything, which for a Marvel movie, is actually kind of surprisingly nice now. I find, and even like even the James Bond movie, like I actually, minus the ending, I enjoyed that just as a Bond, fan, and they if they fuck with that franchise too much, then it's all gonna come crumbling down.
Yeah, in my opinion, I would just kind of advise. I don't want to advise, but I don't
No, go ahead.
I don't think anything's sacred or safe. So I wouldn't
Yeah,
like abandon hope because it's like I like you can check it out and see, but and I'm not saying go in cynically, but I just like don't expect anyone who works there to protect your thing. If they do, it's a
yeah.
miracle. But I think it's a much wiser point of view to be like, yeah, this is probably going to be trash because at this point, I think the onus is on them to prove us wrong instead of the other way around.
And then the other argument I hear is, oh, you just want like right wing, versions of stuff, and it's
Oh.
like, no, I just want to go back to the 1980s where, like, you could just, dive into nostalgia and, like, like just escape for like 2 hours or something, and just,
Yeah, I think that was the point I was going to try to make earlier, and when I lost it, is that I don't want anyone's politics reflected in a piece of entertainment. That's not why I'm interested. I don't want any kind of propaganda. I don't want right wing. I don't want left wing. I don't want it. I don't want that in there. Like you can have virtues and principles and values. That's fine. But when you start, forcing like a modern lens, like that's just like, well, you're supposed to this issue. It's just like, ugh, man, that's got no place in entertainment. That's not why we're there to get a lecture, like go lecture and then offer people to come see that, but don't hide your lecture inside this slick looking movie. It's like that's
yeah.
boring. I don't want that.
Well, I think the other thing too that's very telling is this whole thing with, like, that happened with G4. And
Mm.
I'm not really that much of a gamer anymore, but I do remember, when G4 TV was a thing back in the day, and the fact that, like, they've rebooted it, and the first thing that happens is, that Frost lady or whatever she's named, doing the whole, and and you guys, I see you guys out there. I'm not here for you to jerk off to. It's like, what? It's like, where did that where did that come from? Like, I almost wonder if that whole thing was a publicity stunt. Part of me thinks it has to be, because it's just like, why would you even say something that asinine? But then again, it is Hollywood, so I don't know.
Yeah, well, what I found, I think during my time in Hollywood. I think a lot of people I think part of the reason why, the Trump thing took everyone for such a loop was that a lot of people, in certain these spheres, they can't conceive that people have different ideas. And if they do, they're profane, they're dirty, they're unclean, they're bad, right? So when someone like this goes into a sphere like G4, she's on the she's of the opinion that everyone who works there and everyone in the audience is like gonna be with her, because it's like everyone in her life is, all her agents, her friends, her family, they all regurgitate the same nonsense to one another. They live in this echo chamber. And then when she goes into this sphere, she assumes what she's going to be said is going to be like, like it was in the studio where they clap, but she didn't realize that the audience, I think she overestimated how much of the audience was going to be completely turned off by everything she said.
Well, and I think the other thing was she, she was addressing, the YouTube chat too, or just like generalizing YouTubers. And the one thing that if there's anything I've learned, in my time on the internet, it's don't feed the trolls. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole there's even like a whole subculture, with YouTube regarding that, especially if you get into like the Mr. Medicare type characters, or things like that. That's corporate media just doesn't know how to, I guess, respond to that type of thing anymore.
Yeah, and if you're like, the job of a trained critical theorist is to change the world everywhere you go. You know, that's why it's everywhere, because it's like when they send you off in the world, now you're on this mission to remake the world in our image. That's your goal. It's what you have to do. So when she, I think that's what she's set off to do. That's her job. Like, she's not going to miss an opportunity to correct a group full of men who, had the audacity to say something sexual out loud, or even in a YouTube chat. And I have no idea what was said. I'm sure it was probably some callous stuff, probably mostly just like, ugh, this chick isn't sexy, because she made a point about saying, oh, I'm the Brad Pitt of lesbians. That's something she said about herself, which is just, ugh, like,
The
Brad Pitt wouldn't say that
the
about
the
himself.
the funny thing about that too is, like, I actually know some lesbians, and I'm like, so I text one of them, and I'm like,
That's
hey, like,
hilarious.
do you think that this, woman is attractive? And she's like, oh God, God, no. So I mean, like, yeah, to just maybe like, maybe like butch lesbians, but like, just like, but like I know people that are, even in that I'm putting in parentheses, like, in that group, so to speak, that were like, what, like, why are you dragging me into this whole thing? It's
And like, it's not like, the thing is, like, she's not really that attractive. But the thing is, she wasn't dressed like she was trying to be. She had like a big hoodie on, and like her neck was covered. Like, she looked like she was dressed like a dude. So when people say you're not attractive, why do you care? You're not even trying to be attractive. Who gives a shit? Like, what's it? Why do you take that so personally? Why was that? It's
yeah,
obviously not part of your identity. So what's the big deal?
yeah, it's like same thing with me. Like, I'm in a wheelchair, and the left is one of two things with me, right? These critical theory people, they either go, you're in a wheelchair, and I feel sorry for you, or they use it like disdainfully, and I'm like, okay, so
That's
what?
interesting. You're in a wheelchair.
Like,
I didn't know that.
yeah, I mean, I don't bring it up too much, but because it's not that big of a deal to me. But yeah, I have cerebral palsy, and you know, it's just it's just a thing. It's not my identity, which is,
I was just going to ask you about that. What's your thoughts on ableism studies?
oh God, yeah, the ableism. shit is it's funny because this whole thing with like being differently abled, that's their new term. Like you're not disabled, you're differently abled. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? Because we all have different abilities if you think about it. Like I can't do I can't draw for shit. But Evil Eric, one of my mods who's in the chat, is a terrific
Hell.
artist. He's one of the yeah, Hell Evil Eric. He's the one who did the logo for the show. So that's an ability that he has that I don't. I can do really good audio and video production. Some people can't do that. Um, we all have different abilities and whatnot, but what I have is clearly a disability physically. I need help with that. I have no shame in saying that. But to say that, me being disabled or me being crippled, I use that word a lot too. To say that, that's bad or I shouldn't use that word, it's like, okay, fuck you. You're not me for first off. And B, it's like, why are you getting offended? Why are you getting more offended at my situation than I am?
That's
It's
interesting.
and that's like yeah, that's like a whole nother thing. Like it, the whole critical theory thing. Like I said, I don't bring it up a lot, but whenever I do bring it up, it confuses the woke people a lot, trips them up because it's like, well, here I am, I'm a guy in a wheelchair, and I voted for Trump. It's like they don't know what to do.
Dude,
It
that's an
doesn't.
interesting angle, man. I don't know if you I haven't gone over all your channel, but you addressing ableism studies, I think, has got the potential to get a lot of views because it's very interesting angle hearing it from you.
Yeah, I am going to address it more. I haven't. Part of the thing with the whole ableism thing is I haven't read a lot of it just because I think I would either need need a loaded gun or a lot of whiskey in order to read through some of the stuff. Some of the stuff I have read through is just like comedically bad.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's horrible.
I have a I have a friend who went to Penn State, and I actually want to get him on the show because he's a guy who's able-bodied, but he was required to take one of those disability awareness classes, and so I'm gonna have him on soon and just like pick his brain. Like, okay, so what did they teach you? Like, what was that whole thing like? Especially at Penn State, where it's really big and it's a major university. Because like I've lived with the disability, but I've never studied it like academically, quote unquote. So I have no idea what they're saying.
There's a great chapter in Cynical Theories about that because that was really the first I'd ever gotten to understand it. So, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but like, there's kind of like this TikTok trend where people sort of invent having like a disability or they lean into some kind of quirk about their
Yeah,
personality. So you've seen some of that, and after reading that book, I was like, oh, that's probably a symptom of this ableism thing because what they do is they sort of fold it into intersectionalism, right? Where it's like the amount of characteristics you have that are not, the foundational one, which is, straight white Christian man. The amount of those is the amount of oppression you've faced in your life. So you have more social power in their new hierarchy.
right.
So they started to make the able as one of them
Yeah,
as
I
a bad thing.
yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand that aspect of the whole, critical theory thing. Like the more boxes you check, the more oppressed. And it's funny because like my mom always says, well, thank God you're handicapped because if you were like completely able to completely, white and you're straight, you'd be fucking. It's like, well, I'm only one of those categories.
Plus,
So
you're a Republican. I think that brings you right back
yeah,
down.
I'm still I'm a Republican, and I also like I have an after show called the Titfield Report too. I like big
That's funny.
tits. So, I'm also a misogynist on top of
Oh yeah, that's it. You're
everything
done.
everything else. So yeah. But yeah, this whole thing with identity politics is just absurd. And like, I find that, like, with the whole thing with like comic books and whatnot, like that whole thing has gotten corrupted too, which I didn't think it would initially, but
Because it's a hobby.
unfortunately,
It's
yeah.
it's a relatively obscure hobby. I mean, it was a pretty big industry, but just the books themselves, like I don't know how many people, like in my personal life that I don't know from YouTube, actively read comics. I can't even, maybe one. I can think of one friend who does. Other than that, I don't really know anybody. But the fact that it got infiltrated so aggressively, and basically the entire industry became, woke talking points. It's really it's shocking. Like when I got into this YouTube thing, like I knew movies and stuff had already gotten there, but hearing from Gary and all these in comics division and these guys talk about the corruption of the comic industry, that blew my mind. I had no idea that was going on.
Yeah. Um yeah, I had collected comics up until I was in high school, and then I just ran out of space basically, for all the a lot of them are actually, I don't know if you can see in my frame, a lot of them are kind of, in the background.
Yeah, I could see a
They're
bunch of
like, by
books.
yeah, by my bookshelf. Those are, though a lot of those are, novels, and then just graphic novels, and then comics kind of there. But
Cool.
yeah, so I mean, I stopped. It's kind of interesting because around the time I stopped collecting was around the time that everything started to change, in the comic book industry itself.
Yeah.
And I know that there's Gamergate, and I know that there was also Comicsgate as well. But it's interesting, to say the least.
I'm looking at JP Santee calling me a nerdrotic simp. Yes, very much so. I simp hard for Gary. He's been on my channel a few
Yeah,
times.
I've
He
I've been yeah, I've been called a nerdrotic simp as well.
It is what
Um,
it is. I love the guy. I went out to the meetup in Vegas, and he's great. He's a great guy. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the guy. I love his content. I think he's a good person, and he's done a lot for me personally on the channel. Just coming by last year to talk about the Expanse, this year to talk about the Expanse, and one time on the Culture Crime Fighters, and all those are incredibly well watched videos for me, and got my subscribers way up. And furthermore, I had a video go viral last year. I guess that was earlier this year. No, yeah, it was 2021. It was about the Bill Burr Gina Carano thing. Do you remember that whole controversy?
I remember the whole thing with. I remember when Gina got canceled herself, but oh, was that when they took down like Bill Burr's action figure or something because he stood for Gina? I don't remember that.
No. Well, for what happened with me was, so after Gina Carano got fired from the Mandalorian, people were wondering like, when is Bill Burr or any of these people from the show going to come out and say anything? And we didn't hear anything. And one night, I was listening to this podcast, the Bill Burt podcast, and it was Bill Burr and Burt Kreischer. And I was listening to it, and all of a sudden, I hear them talking about this thing where like Burr's essentially addressing it, and I'm like, I don't think anyone knows that he's talked about this. So I just quickly cut up a video. It's about 10 or 12 minutes long. And I put it out, and it did pretty well initially. It got like 2,000 or so views, 3,000 or so views over the weekend, which was like great for me. But then Monday night, I guess what happened was the video I think what happened was the video got saw by somebody who was a fan of Midnight's Edge. And then they told Midnight's Edge what was reported. And then they put out a video explaining Bill Burr's response to the whole thing. And that video like went, through the roof, like 400,000 views or something like that. And meanwhile, I'm sitting here like, I kind of broke that story on Friday. It's Sunday. I'm not getting any credit. And for this, a channel of my size, it would have been really nice to have gotten credit. Now, meanwhile, the video started to do really well. Like it now sits at something like 135,000 views, but it wasn't doing that great. And Gary from Nerdrotic took it upon himself twice, once on the Nooner to mention that I was the one who put the story out first. And then again on Friday Night Tights when there was something like 8,000 people watching. And when he mentioned that, that sent all these people to my channel and it put me over 1,000 and got me monetized. So yes, JP Santee, I am a Nerdrotic simp because he has been a saint to me. Love that guy.
Yeah, well, JP Santee is one of our lovable trolls that we have here. He logs under multiple accounts, and
Ah,
but you have 5 accounts, so that's 5 more viewers for me. So
hail.
thank you.
Thanks for the traction,
Um,
JP.
but yeah, I that's the other thing I wanted to ask you about is as a YouTuber, I find that this whole thing with the way YouTube is set up, I've got to say, I mean, clearly the system is somewhat broken, but it seems like unless you have like 1,000 subs, and even then, um, like unless you really are on top of the algorithm and producing videos every single day, which I don't know how anyone has time for that. With if you have
I
like a
don't.
full-time job or something like that. I honestly, good for Garen, good for Midnight's Edge if they can do that daily, but I just don't see how, unless you commit, to it fully, how you can even get into the algorithm. Really,
Bro, I don't know.
yeah,
Like I said, I mean, most of my growth has been directly because Gary came to the channel and he gave me credit. Now, granted, I did have, that one viral video and that got me a lot of subs. I mean,
yeah,
130,000 views of a hot story. People came and subscribed and, some of those people are in my chat every single day. And so I don't, I'm not, obviously I put in work, but yeah, man. As far as that, I really don't know. I've been rethinking my channel a lot of late because I was kind of doing the thing where I'm chasing the story, the weekly story, and I'll make a 10-minute video about it to try to get some eyes on it. But like there's guys like Gary out there who are doing it better than me, and B, I kind of started to feel like a whore. Like I kind of started to feel like I'm just doing this to yeah, I have thoughts on it, but I'm just doing it to get eyes on the channel. And it's
yeah,
not really what I want to, I don't know. So I've just been like kind of thinking about, I don't know, rethinking. And I honestly, I don't have any answers for you, man. I wish I did. I would, my thought, at least my philosophy on YouTube right now is to just try to have as much fun as possible
yeah,
and literally just treat it like that. And not to say that means I don't work hard, but it's like I'm gonna do what I
sure,
want to do here, and I'm gonna have fun. And I mean, that's already paying off for me emotionally and spiritually. Like I just feel like a happier
sure.
person doing this. I don't feel trapped under the wheels of the YouTube monster. But I don't know, man. Just do what makes you happy, do what makes you feel good, and hopefully other people will respond to it.
And that's always kind of been my attitude as well. I mean, like I said, I've been podcasting for several years. It's also interesting because with this whole thing with live stream, people forget that it's still relatively new, and I must work better in the long form format than I do pre-recording short, like 10-minute videos, because then like I always end up spending more time editing
Yeah,
those
you
and
do. You do.
whatnot than
But
I do
the difference
producing.
is if you think about the audience, and because I know this about myself, I'd be more willing to take a risk on a short video of someone I don't know than a 2-hour podcast.
Yeah,
So you're basically kind of inviting people to see what you're about. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, here's a snippet of what you can get if you kind of start hanging out with me online. I mean, that's the best thing I can interpret it. What I like to think of it, I try to encourage Vigilante to do the videos too, because his growth isn't really growing much, but he's such a great voice. Like I love him so much. Is to just take what I advise him to do is like, dude, just take like, when we do the show and you have a take about something, just take that one take and make that a video, you know what I mean? Separate from the podcast. and see if that, if that'll gain some traction, because eventually something will click. I put out 2 videos that somehow it worked. One about the Expanse getting canceled. That's got like 50,000 views, and the birth thing. Now, granted, I don't have a lot of follow-ups to that, but it still caught some
Sure.
kind of something, you know what I mean, with the audience. So,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's like it's alchemy. You know what
Well,
I mean?
the other thing too is, and again, I agree with everything you're saying. I guess my complaint with YouTube is kind of that they kind of want to pigeonhole you. It seems like just how the system is set up. Whereas, like, I cover a lot of different things on the channel. I cover news and politics, but then I also cover pop culture and whatnot. I don't want to say I do what Jeremy does with Geeks and Gamers, but I'm kind of I'm all over the place. I just don't want to start up like 5 different channels
Yeah,
for
I get that
each
too.
topic because those are those that can be tiring just to
Exhausting.
manage. Yeah,
Yeah.
those. But I find that just YouTube kind of in it of itself. It's interesting because, like you said, you'll hit one video that like gets like a lot of views, and then you make like a really good video, and then it'll just get like 20 views or something. It,
Oh
it's
my
really
god, dude.
it's
I
really
made a video
weird.
about Peter Dinklage last week, and I put in a lot of editing work on that, like probably more than I should have. And it's sitting there at like, I don't know, 60 views. It's, no,
Yeah,
no traction at all. And I was like, damn it, I thought that was a good video. But it's just kind of, it's like anything else. You just got to get up, you got to do it. It's like, any other practice, whether it's meditation or yoga or going to the gym, whatever. It's like you just keep doing it. Like you're not gonna, like, it's not like you're gonna get the results today, the first day you do it, or even the 100th day you do it. You got to make it a life practice, and then that is, to me, that seems to be the only system that works. I'm saying this like I don't know, but that's what makes sense to me.
yeah. Well, and for me, like, I think the other thing that happens a lot is like I'll post a video that that will just be like sitting there and it won't do anything, and then that same video will blow up like months and months later too. That's the other weird thing.
Yeah.
Like I made a video, and this was one of my like my first big, I guess, controversial moments was back when the whole Louis C.K. thing happened. I was one of the YouTubers and said, hey, I'm still a fan of Louis C.K. I don't really think he did anything wrong in comparison to like Harvey Weinstein and whatnot. So why are we canceling him? Well, that video kind of sat there for, I guess, like 3 4 months, and then all of a sudden it blew up, and a lot of were people like, oh, a lot of it was just hate comments saying like, oh, you're defending Louis' behavior, and it's like, man, not. I mean, partially because he did ask for consent, but also not really. I'm just saying that he shouldn't be banned from entertainment forever. He should be given a second chance because he's not Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, no,
And
totally. I think the
so,
whole Louis thing was
yeah,
way blown out of proportion. It's just so exaggerated as to like what he did versus, I think, but you know what? So we were talking about earlier, man. He apologized, and that just added to the fire. It didn't help at all. It just made him look worse, and that's the issue. But hey, man, I
yeah,
gotta get going. It's I gotta wrap up. I haven't
yeah.
eaten
No,
yet. I'm
no problem,
starving.
man. So, anyway, well, with that in mind, where can people find you and whatnot?
You can come to Foul Ball Productions. I think I may have made a few fans here tonight. There's a lot of really great, lots of support in the chat, really positive vibes, which I appreciate. Thanks, guys. It's nice to see support like that. Dude, it was great to meet you. You can catch me at Foul Ball Productions. I put out a weekly podcast with Vigilante Williamson called The Culture Crime Fighters. We do it every Wednesday, either on my channel or Vigilante Williams's. Or you could see the MFR Cocktail Lounge every Friday night, following Friday Night Tights at 8:30 Central. Try to have as much fun as possible while, I don't know, covering some serious topics, man. But I
Yeah,
really appreciate you inviting me on here.
likewise. Thanks for coming on. coming on, man. And I'm always available if you want to have me on, and I'd be happy to do your podcast in return.
Right
So,
on, brother. Yeah, I'll you know what? I'll talk to the team, talk to Vigilante, see what we can get going. But really appreciate you having me on, man.
all right, man. Well, thanks to everyone who tuned in, and thanks to everyone who's listening to the audio version of this as well. Please go subscribe to Foul Ball Productions. Real quick, where did you get that name from? I'm curious.
That's my dad's nickname, so it's an homage to him.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Cool. So, subscribe to Foul Ball Productions. The link is in the description. So,
Yeah,
go check him out. Follow him on Twitter as well. At Foul I think it's Foulball Productions as well, right?
yeah.
On
Foulball Productions
Twitter.
everywhere, Twitter,
So,
Instagram, the whole thing. You guys can definitely come by and talk to me over there on my channel. I'd be happy to engage. I love a good conversation, so I appreciate
totally.
it, Sam.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on, and folks, thanks for tuning in. Have a good night. See you next week.